Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I work as a software developer in Singapore and had been putting in 12-hour days for months on a massive project. When my boss told me to take time off, I booked a solo trip to visit my family in California. I hadn't seen them in over a year. Flying solo internationally means you'll learn to be flexible since you're not coordinating with anyone else. I got to the airport in Singapore for my 15-hour flight to Los Angeles. At the check-in counter, I handed over my passport to a friendly agent. When she processed my documents, I noticed my boarding pass showed a middle seat. 15 hours in a middle seat sounded rough. I asked if there was any chance I could switch to a window or aisle seat, mentioning that I understood if it wasn't possible. She clicked around on her computer for a minute, then told me she could move me to an aisle seat in the same row. I thanked her, genuinely excited about the upgrade. An aisle seat on a long-haul flight meant I could stretch my legs and get up without bothering anyone. When I was finishing my check-in, a couple approached the counter next to me. The woman looked to be in her 40s, and the man with her seemed nice enough, but he had this apologetic look like he already knew what was coming. The agent helped them with their passports and baggage, then handed over their boarding passes. The woman looked at hers and frowned. She asked if there were any rows of 3 with an empty middle seat. The agent looked confused, then checked her screen and explained that she couldn't guarantee any seats would remain empty, but offered to seat them next to each other. The woman refused, saying she wanted to sit with an empty seat between them. Her husband mumbled something to her that I couldn't hear, but his face was turning red. He looked embarrassed. She cut him off, saying she liked the extra room and repeating her demand to be seated with an empty seat between them. The agent tried to explain how seat assignments work on a full flight, but this woman kept repeating the same demand. She wasn't yelling, but she had this tone like she was talking to someone who was too stupid to understand what she wanted. The agent explained that on a full flight, she couldn't guarantee that middle seats would remain empty and offered to try finding 2 aisle seats across from each other. The woman dismissed this suggestion, restating that she wanted 3 seats in a row with the middle one empty for extra space. The agent told her she couldn't reserve an empty seat for extra space, but mentioned that if they purchased 3 seats, she could guarantee they'd have the space they wanted. The woman refused to pay for a seat she wasn't using, calling the situation ridiculous and complaining about what kind of airline doesn't accommodate simple requests. I felt bad for the agent, who was trying her best to help. She went through several different options, offering different seat combinations, explaining the policies, even checking if there were any premium economy upgrades available. But this woman kept insisting that the airline should somehow guarantee her free extra space. The man with her kept trying to quietly suggest they just take adjacent seats, but she shot him down every time. Other passengers were starting to line up behind them, and I could see people checking their watches and looking annoyed. After about 15 minutes of this back and forth, the woman accepted 2 seats next to each other, but she made sure to let the agent know how disappointed she was with the customer service and mentioned she'd be writing a complaint letter. I boarded my flight a few hours later, found my aisle seat and settled in for the long journey. When people were still boarding, I noticed something that made me smile. The middle seat between me and the passenger across the aisle was empty, not because the airline had intentionally left it open, but just because that's how the bookings worked out that day. About halfway through boarding, I saw the same couple from the check-in counter walking down the aisle. They found their seats a few rows behind me, and I could hear the woman complaining to her husband about how cramped everything was. She told him she'd been right about needing better seats, and explained that this was exactly why she'd wanted the extra space. Her husband just sighed and didn't respond. When we took off, I stretched out a bit and put my stuff in the empty middle seat next to me. It was nice having the extra room, but the difference between me and that woman at check-in was that I understood I'd gotten lucky, not that I deserved it. The flight attendants came around for the meal service, and I overheard one of them talking to her colleague about difficult passengers during check-in. They didn't mention names, but I had a pretty good idea who they were discussing. One flight attendant mentioned that some people just don't understand that they can't create space out of thin air. About 10 hours into the flight, I got up to stretch my legs and walk around. When I passed by the couple's row, I could see the woman was still complaining, this time about the meal quality and how the entertainment system wasn't working properly. Her husband looked like he wanted to disappear into his seat. When we landed in Los Angeles, I was refreshed and ready to see my family. When I was waiting for my luggage, I saw the couple again. The woman was now arguing with someone at customer service about filing a complaint for her experience. I thought about how different our flights had been. I'd gotten lucky with an empty middle seat and had a comfortable journey. She'd gotten exactly what she paid for, but spent the entire time being miserable about it. I have a best friend who is one of the strongest people I know. When she was young, she had her own son and also adopted her sister's newborn daughter. 17 years ago, she stepped up when her sister couldn't handle being a mom and took in that baby like it was her own flesh and blood. Watching her raise those two kids alone was incredible. This woman worked 3 jobs at one point just to make sure her children had everything they needed. She saved up and bought each kid their own PlayStation 5 so they wouldn't have to fight over sharing one. I always told her she was spoiling them, but honestly, she deserved to spoil her kids after all the hard work she put in. The son turned out great. He's respectful, does well in school, and genuinely appreciates everything his mom does for him. But the adopted daughter, well, that's where things started going downhill. When the daughter turned 16, she completely went off the rails. One day, she straight up stole my friend's car and purse. Keep in mind, this girl didn't even have a driver's license. My friend was devastated but refused to call the police. She told me she couldn't get her own daughter arrested and that the girl would learn from this mistake. I tried to argue that stealing a car was serious and what if she got in an accident, but my friend said she had to handle this as her mom. After that incident, the daughter decided she didn't want to live with my friend anymore and moved in with her biological mom, my friend's sister. The sister had 0 rules in her house. The daughter stopped going to school entirely and started hanging around with a rough crowd. Within 6 months, she was pregnant. Despite everything, we all rallied around to help with the baby situation. My friend was over the moon about becoming a grandmother and wanted to throw the biggest baby shower possible. She spent weeks planning it, bought decorations, hired a caterer, and invited everyone she knew. I helped her set up the whole thing because I could see how excited she was. The day of the baby shower arrived, and the daughter showed up an hour late. Instead of mingling with the guests who had brought gifts and food, she spent most of the party outside smoking with her friends. When she finally came back inside for the gift opening, everyone was trying to be supportive and excited for her. Then came the speech portion. The daughter stood up and started thanking people, which seemed nice at first. She thanked her biological mom for being there for her through everything, and said she couldn't have done it without her support. Then she looked directly at my friend and thanked her by her first name for throwing the party, completely ignoring the fact that my friend had raised her for 17 years. The room went silent. My friend's face crumpled for just a second before she forced a smile. I wanted to say something, but my friend grabbed my arm and shook her head. After 17 years of being called mom, her daughter had just demoted her to first name status in front of everyone who knew their history. Even after that humiliation, my friend bought duplicate everything for the baby. 2 cribs, 2 car seats, 2 complete wardrobes, so the baby would have supplies at both houses. When the baby was born, things seemed to improve. The daughter was calling my friend mom again and asking for help with everything. My friend was there every day, changing diapers, doing feedings, basically being a second parent to this baby. But it only lasted about a month. The daughter had moved into my mom's neighborhood, so I started hearing things. My mom would call and tell me about seeing the daughter leaving the baby with random people while she went out partying. Then I noticed her social media posts because she forgot to block me. She was posting about wanting to go to parties and asking if anyone could babysit. She was airing out drama with the baby's father online for everyone to see. The worst part was when she posted laughing about her friends calling in bomb threats to the local school and mall, talking about how funny it was that they shut everything down. I screenshot that post and showed it to my friend. I told her she needed to see what her daughter was posting online. My friend just said the girl was young and making mistakes and would figure it out eventually. I tried explaining that this wasn't normal teenage stuff and that talking about bomb threats like a joke was serious, but my friend said she couldn't abandon her daughter when she needed her most. I removed the daughter from all my social media after that. I couldn't watch her make a mockery of everything my friend had sacrificed for her. 2 months later, my friend called me all excited. She wanted to throw her daughter the most amazing 18th birthday party. She was thinking of renting out the community center, maybe getting a DJ, and definitely ordering a cake from that expensive bakery downtown. When I said it sounded like a lot of work, she went on about how her daughter deserved it because this was a big milestone. She wanted to do themes and get really nice gifts, then asked if I would help her plan it. I sat there listening to her enthusiasm and felt sick. This woman had given everything to a daughter who treated her like garbage, and here she was, planning to spend hundreds more dollars on someone who would probably show up high and spend the party complaining. I told her I needed to be honest about something. When she asked what was wrong, I explained that I wasn't going to come to the party. She asked if she had done something wrong, and I had to tell her that she hadn't done anything wrong at all. I explained that I just couldn't stomach watching her daughter disrespect her anymore, and that after how the girl had been acting and treating her, I couldn't stand being around her. My friend said her daughter was still learning how to be an adult, but I told her the girl was 18 and posting about bomb threats online while my friend bought her everything she could want. I wished her a great party and said I hoped her daughter would appreciate what she was doing for her, but I couldn't be there to watch it happen. That was 2 months ago. My friend hasn't spoken to me since. No texts, no calls, nothing. I've tried reaching out a few times, but she's clearly done with our friendship. The party happened without me. I heard the daughter showed up 2 hours late, complained about the decorations, and left early to go to some other party. My friend spent over $1,000 on the whole thing. Last week, I ran into my friend at the grocery store. She saw me and immediately turned around and walked the other way. It hurt, but I know I made the right choice. I've been doing odd jobs around the neighborhood for about 2 years now, since I lost my factory job. I shovel driveways, rake leaves, clean gutters, whatever people need. Most folks are decent about it, pay me fair and on time. But there's always that one person who thinks they can take advantage. This whole mess started when we got hit with about 8 inches of snow overnight. I was out early going door to door, offering to shovel driveways for $20 each. Most people either already had it handled or politely declined, but then I got to this house on Maple Street with a really long driveway that was completely buried. This woman answered the door when I knocked. She was probably in her 50s, wearing a bathrobe and looking annoyed that someone had the nerve to disturb her morning. I told her good morning and explained that I was offering snow removal services for $20. She immediately complained that $20 seemed like too much money. I explained that it was a pretty big driveway and the snow was really deep, so it would take me about an hour and a half to finish the job. She looked out at her driveway, then back at me. I could see her calculating something in her head. She agreed to the price but said she didn't have cash on her right now and would pay me the next day. I hesitated. I've been burned before by people promising to pay later, but I really needed the work. The electric bill was due in 3 days. I asked if she promised she'd have the money tomorrow. She assured me she wasn't going anywhere and told me to just get the work done. So I spent the next hour and 40 minutes busting my back on her driveway. It was one of those heavy, wet snows that feels like you're moving concrete. By the time I finished, I was sweating despite the cold, and my shoulders were aching. The driveway looked perfect though, completely clear all the way down to the pavement. I knocked on her door again when I was done and told her I was finished and would stop by tomorrow for payment. She just said yes and told me tomorrow would be fine. She shut the door without even looking at the work I'd done. Should have been a red flag, but I needed to believe she'd pay. The next day I showed up around 2 in the afternoon. It had snowed again overnight, just a light dusting, maybe an inch. I knocked on her door and waited. She opened the door and saw it was me. I told her I was there for payment for yesterday's snow removal. She pointed out that it had snowed again last night and told me to look at her driveway. I acknowledged that it had snowed but explained that this was new snow and I had cleared what was there yesterday like we agreed. She argued that if she was going to pay me $20, the driveway should stay clear. She seemed to think that since it had snowed again, she shouldn't have to pay. I explained that this wasn't how snow removal worked and that I had cleared the snow that was there when she hired me. I told her new snow would be a separate job. She called that ridiculous and insisted that snow removal should include keeping the driveway clear. I reminded her that I had done the work she asked for and she owed me $20. She refused to pay me when her driveway had snow on it again. My temper started rising. I'd worked my butt off for this woman and now she was trying to stiff me. I told her she couldn't be serious and explained that I had spent almost 2 hours clearing her driveway yesterday. I said that just because it snowed again didn't mean she didn't owe me for work I already did. She told me to lower my voice and said her neighbors didn't need to hear me yelling. I said I wasn't yelling, but I would if she didn't pay me what she owed me. I reminded her we had an agreement. She claimed the agreement was for snow removal and there was still snow on her driveway. This was insane. I'd dealt with difficult customers before, but this was a whole new level of entitled behavior. I told her that if she wanted me to clear the new snow, that would be another $20, but she still owed me for yesterday's work. She refused to pay me anything until her driveway was completely clear and stayed clear. I said that wasn't how any of this worked and that she couldn't just decide not to pay for work that was already done. I was getting loud now, I'll admit it, but I was frustrated and needed that money. I told her that if she didn't pay me right now, I was calling the police because this was theft of services. She yelled that I couldn't threaten her on her own property. I said it wasn't a threat, it was a promise, and told her to pay me or I was calling the cops. I pulled out my phone to show I was serious. That's when she completely lost it. She screamed at me to get off her property right now. She disappeared into her house and came back about 30 seconds later carrying a snow shovel. Before I could react, she swung it hard and caught me right across the left shoulder. The metal edge hit me square and sent a sharp pain shooting down my arm. I asked if she was insane and told her she had just assaulted me. She justified it by saying I was threatening her and she was defending herself. I pointed out that I was standing on her doorstep asking for payment, and that wasn't a threat. My shoulder was throbbing and I could already feel it stiffening up. I immediately called the police while she stood there, still holding the shovel like she might swing it again. The cops showed up about 10 minutes later. 2 officers, a younger guy, and an older woman who looked like she'd seen everything. They separated us and started taking statements. The officer asked her directly if she had hit me with a shovel. She didn't deny it but said I was on her property threatening her and she had every right to defend herself. The officer asked again if she did hit me with the shovel. She admitted she did but explained that I was yelling at her and threatening to call the police. She asked what she was supposed to do. The officer looked at her like she'd lost her mind. The officer explained that threatening to call the police wasn't a crime, but hitting someone with a shovel was assault. She argued that I was trespassing. The officer asked if it was true that I was there to collect payment for work I had performed. She admitted that was true but tried to argue further. The officer pointed out that if I was conducting business, then I wasn't trespassing. They arrested her right there on her front lawn. She kept arguing with them the whole time, insisting she was justified in hitting me because I'd raised my voice. The officers weren't buying it for a second. The older officer came over to check on me after they'd put her in the patrol car. She asked how my shoulder was feeling. I said it hurt pretty bad and asked if I should get it looked at. She suggested it was probably a good idea and asked if I wanted them to call an ambulance. I told her no, I could drive myself to urgent care. She advised me to make sure I got documentation of the injury because I would need it for court. I ended up with a deep bruise and some muscle strain that took about a week to heal fully, but 3 days later I got a call from Karen. She said she would pay me the $20 if I dropped the charges. I told her it was too late for that and she should have thought about that before she hit me with a shovel. She got charged with assault and had to pay a fine plus court costs that ended up being way more than the $20 she tried to avoid paying me. My husband and I were 20 years old, newly married, and desperately trying to make ends meet while going to college. We'd found what seemed like the perfect solution: a small mother-in-law house behind a main residence. The rent was affordable, and it gave us the independence we craved as newlyweds, starting our lives together. The landlord seemed nice enough when we first met them. He was quiet and kept to himself, while she did most of the talking during our initial meeting. They explained the setup: we'd have our own entrance, our own utilities, and basically live independently from them. It sounded perfect for two broke college students. We'd been living there for about 8 months, and everything had been going smoothly. I was majoring in education, and my husband was studying business. We both worked part-time jobs to cover rent and expenses, but we were managing. We'd even started to feel like we'd found our little home. That particular Saturday, we decided to have a small barbecue in our tiny backyard area. Nothing fancy, just some burgers and hot dogs with a couple of friends from school. My husband was manning the grill and I was setting up a card table with plates and drinks. Our friends had just arrived, and we were all laughing about something that happened in one of our classes. That's when he appeared. The landlord just walked right into our backyard without knocking or calling out. He didn't even seem to notice that we had company or that we were clearly in the middle of something. He announced that he needed to talk to us about something important. My husband looked up from the grill, spatula still in hand, and asked what was going on. He wondered if it could wait until after we ate. The landlord said it couldn't wait. He told us they'd made a decision about the property. I felt my stomach drop. The way he said it, so matter-of-factly, made me nervous. I asked what kind of decision he was talking about. He then dropped the bombshell that they were converting our unit into a daycare center. He explained that his wife thought it would be a good business opportunity. The silence that followed was deafening. Our friends stopped talking and just stared. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. My husband asked him to repeat what he'd just said, clearly unable to believe what he was hearing. The landlord confirmed that his wife had been looking into childcare for months and that there was good money in it. He casually told us that we needed to be out by the end of next month. I protested that we had a lease and had been good tenants who always paid on time. He simply said that the lease had a 30-day notice clause, and they were giving us 30 days notice. I wanted to argue, but I was only 20 and didn't know anything about tenant rights. My husband looked just as stunned as I felt. My husband pointed out that school was starting the next week, and we were in the middle of our college careers. He stressed that we couldn't just find a new place in a month. The landlord coldly replied that our situation wasn't really their problem and that they'd made their decision. And with that, he just walked away, left us standing there with our half-cooked burgers and our confused friends, trying to process what had just happened. The next month was a nightmare. We scrambled to find a new place while starting a new semester. We had to use money we'd saved for textbooks to cover moving expenses and deposits. But we managed to find a small apartment closer to campus, and we moved out with 3 days to spare. I spent an entire week cleaning that little house. Even though school had started and I was already behind in my classes, I scrubbed every surface, vacuumed every corner, and even rented a carpet cleaner. I wanted to make sure we got our full deposit back because we desperately needed that money. The day we were supposed to do the final walkthrough, we arranged to meet Karen, the landlord's wife, at the house. My husband and I arrived right on time, expecting a quick inspection and to hand over the keys. But when we got there, Karen was already inside. She told us she'd already started looking around when we expressed surprise at finding her there. When I asked why she'd gone in without us, since we were supposed to do the inspection together, she reminded us that she had keys and it was her property. She was walking around with a clipboard, writing things down. I felt uneasy but figured she was just being thorough. I asked her how everything looked and mentioned that I'd spent all week cleaning. She said she'd see and continued her inspection. She made her way to the kitchen and stopped in front of the refrigerator. Without saying a word, she grabbed one side of it and started pulling. She then asked us to help her move it. My husband asked why she wanted to move the refrigerator. She said she needed to check underneath. I had no idea the refrigerator could even be moved. In all the months we'd lived there, it had never occurred to me to clean under it. I was 20 years old and had never rented a place before. Nobody had ever mentioned checking under appliances. When we moved the refrigerator, there was dust and some food crumbs underneath. Nothing terrible, but it wasn't clean. Karen declared the condition unacceptable and announced that the entire deposit was forfeited. I protested that I'd cleaned everything else perfectly and explained that I didn't know I was supposed to clean under the refrigerator. She coldly said that ignorance wasn't an excuse and called the area disgusting. My husband tried to defend me, pointing out that I spent a week cleaning and everything else was spotless. He said her demand wasn't fair. Karen insisted that the lease required the property to be returned in the same condition it was received and that this clearly wasn't the case. I argued that she'd never cleaned under the refrigerator before we moved in either. I told her I would have noticed if she'd moved it during our initial walkthrough. She dismissed my point, saying that wasn't relevant and that we were responsible for cleaning everything. She was being unnecessarily cruel about it. I started crying, partly from frustration and partly from the stress of everything we'd been through. We needed that deposit money badly. Karen told me that crying wouldn't change anything and that I should have been more thorough. We left that day with nothing. No deposit, no explanation beyond the refrigerator incident, and no recourse. This was 1985, and tenant protection laws were practically non-existent. But life has a funny way of working things out. A few weeks later, my husband was talking to a classmate whose family lived in our old neighborhood. During the conversation, he mentioned our situation and where we used to live. The classmate expressed surprise that we'd lived behind the Johnsons and shared that they were currently being audited by the IRS. When my husband asked how he knew this information, the classmate explained that his mother was friends with their daughter. He said that apparently someone had reported them for not declaring rental income on their taxes. My husband came home that day with the biggest grin I'd ever seen. He told me I'd never guess what he'd heard that day. When he told me about the audit, I felt a satisfaction I'd never experienced before. It turned out that my husband had called the IRS hotline shortly after our move-out disaster. He reported that we'd been paying rent in cash for months and suspected they weren't declaring it as income. The investigation revealed years of unreported rental income. Not only did they face hefty penalties and interest charges, but the audit process dragged on for over a year. According to their daughter, who we ran into occasionally around town, the stress and financial strain were enormous. They never opened their daycare center. The house sat empty for over 2 years while they dealt with their tax problems. When they finally tried to rent it out again, word had gotten around about how they treated tenants, and they had trouble finding anyone willing to live there. 40 years later, I've owned several homes and rented many others. I always get my full deposit back because I've learned how to clean properly. But in all those years and all those moves, not a single landlord has ever asked me to move a refrigerator to check underneath it. When I got hired as the IT manager, my main job was to replace all the old equipment that had been sitting around for way too long. The company had these ancient monitors that were probably 15 years old and weighed about 30 pounds each. People had been complaining about them for months because they caused eye strain and the picture quality was terrible. Yesterday, I was doing my usual equipment swap on the 3rd floor where the accounting department sits. I had already replaced monitors at 4 different desks and loaded all the old ones onto my cart. The plan was simple: roll them down to the basement storage area and then send them off for proper recycling. I was pushing the cart toward the elevator when this woman I had never seen before stopped me in the hallway. She was probably in her 40s, wearing a business suit and had this stern look on her face. She asked what I thought I was doing with those monitors. I told her I was collecting old equipment for recycling and that I was the IT manager. She said those monitors belonged to the company and I couldn't just take them. I explained that I was handling the proper disposal process since these were being replaced with newer models. I pointed to my company badge and tried to stay calm about the whole thing. She asked how she could know I actually worked there, and said anyone could put on a fake badge. I offered to show her my employee ID and suggested she could call the IT department to verify. She said that was exactly what she was going to do and told me to wait right there while she called Human Resources. I tried to explain that I really did work there and was just doing my job. She said a real employee wouldn't mind waiting for a verification and told me to stay put. She pulled out her phone and started making calls while positioning herself between me and the elevator like some kind of security guard. I felt ridiculous standing there with a cart full of old monitors, basically being held up by someone who probably started working here last week. The whole thing was so weird that I didn't know how to react. Part of me wanted to just walk past her and continue with my work, but I didn't want to cause a bigger problem. So I stood there checking my phone while other employees walked by looking confused. After about 5 minutes of her talking on the phone, she hung up and stared at me. She told me they were sending someone down to verify my identity. I said that was great and this should clear everything up quickly. She just gave me a look that said we would see about that. Another 5 minutes passed without anyone saying anything. I could see other employees looking over when they walked by, probably wondering why someone was guarding the IT guy. Then I heard footsteps coming from down the hall. My colleague from the IT team came around the corner, looked at the situation, and knew exactly what was happening. He asked if everything was okay. I told him we were having a small disagreement about whether I actually worked here. My colleague told her that I was the IT manager, had been there for 3 years, and ran the entire department. Her face went through different expressions when she realized what had happened. First, she looked confused, then embarrassed, then annoyed. She asked how she was supposed to know that and said, I could have been anyone. My colleague pointed out that I was wearing a company badge and was obviously doing IT work. Plus, I had introduced myself as the IT manager. She said anyone can claim to be anyone, and she was just being careful. I told her I understood her concern for company security, but maybe next time she could ask more questions before assuming someone was stealing equipment. She said she was just doing what she thought was right. She walked away without apologizing, leaving me standing there with my colleague, who just shook his head and laughed. He asked if she was a new hire. I said she must be since I had never seen her before. He said at least she cared about company property. I finally made it to the elevator and finished disposing of the equipment, but the whole thing got me thinking about how quick people are to assume the worst. Later that day, I found out from HR that she had actually called them twice, once during our hallway standoff, and again afterward to complain that I had been rude and unprofessional. HR called me to get my side of the story, and when I explained what happened, they just sighed and said they would handle it. They told me this wasn't her first complaint about other employees since starting work there 2 weeks ago. She had already filed complaints against a janitor for being in areas after hours, a delivery person for not having proper identification, and a maintenance worker for using tools without supervision. The HR person said they were going to talk to her about appropriate workplace behavior and the proper ways to report security concerns. They also mentioned that several other employees had come forward with similar stories about her confrontational approach to anyone she didn't recognize. A week later, she had been let go during her probationary period. Her pattern of hostile behavior toward other employees and her refusal to admit when she was wrong had created too many problems for management to ignore. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.